All right, hello everyone. My name is Jasmine Hundal. I'm a current third year HemOnc fellow at the Cleveland Clinic, and I'd like to welcome today Ms. Grace McNamara. How are you doing today?
I'm good. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, great, likewise. Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. So yeah, Grace McNamara. It is an Irish accent you can hear. My background is physiology, epidemiology, and I've always worked in tech. So I kind of span lifestyle medicine, technology, chronic disease management typically, and how does technology play a part in that for clinicians as well as for patients or just people of the population.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm looking forward to our discussion today. So we will be talking about Women's Health Week. So um, since with your background, I was wondering what was the initial draw to the intersection of like health technology and women's health?
You know what? I think in 2024, when I stepped back and I was doing some consultancy work and I was building ultimately some white papers in the space of women's health, but mainly actually in the space of women in leadership, I just kind of found that there was all these gaps, right, that we hadn't explored before. I mean, when I did my undergrad physiology, we didn't talk about women's health being different to male health. Like we literally didn't have a special section for it. And it's the same in epidemiology when I did it. We didn't have any special focus on women. And obviously, the more maybe it comes with age, right? You get into the knowledge of obviously there's so many differences. But then the more I work in tech and the more I work obviously in healthcare and the more research coming to light, just the gaps, Jasmine, to be honest with you, the gaps just became more and more and more obvious. And,
Hmm.
as I was heading into my 40s and heading into, my perimenopause phases, I was like, what is this? Like, there's this kind of black hole of lack of knowledge. And like, surely someone who's spent their entire career in the world of health should be more informed than your average person. I was like, I'm not. I don't feel any more informed than people that are completely blind from to the world of healthcare. So yes, I think 2024 to me was actually about the kind of the big alarm bell that I was
Hmm.
like, I've got to lean into this a little bit more, and we have got to lean into this more as an industry and as a just professionals across the space. So that was the kind of start of it. It was more around leadership, and then the
Yeah.
dots started connecting, knowing that if we haven't got leadership, women in leadership at board level, for example, then set
Mhm.
strategies aren't set that are enabling, products and services and care to be designed around what do women need. The other aspect that I found was interesting when I was doing a lot of work around the investment space and the startup space, the vast majority still lends itself to reproductive health. And I kind of get a little bit like, are we reducing women back down to the reproductive organs? Is that what we're doing?
Hmm.
And it was kind of this question mark of, well, what about all the other areas
Hmm.
of health? And likewise, most people aren't trying to get pregnant at any one time. And I know you are, so
Hmm.
congratulations. But it's not what most women are at any one time, is either trying
Hmm.
to or recovering. So hence that breadth of health needs to be done better. And I think today there's still massive gaps in that space.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like over the years, I feel like we've seen a slow transition, but I feel like pre-COVID era, I think like I feel like things have totally changed like after post-COVID and pre-COVID in healthcare and tech industries. I feel like there has been a definitely revolution and definitely ongoing excitement. So I think women's health was definitely something that was not spoken about as much, and especially also because, as you know, there's limited research and funding in this space, right? Other than disease related, even then, if you look into it, there are definitely imbalances between it, and then
Yeah.
the tech divide, and then the tech integration into medicine has been more on a slower side or more on other aspects rather than on supportive care. So it's really exciting that companies are taking a look. And as we know, there are so many conferences now, right, that are happening that talk about this, and there's so many startup companies that have taken this lead on. Someone who I guess you are in leadership perspective, right? How do you think has a work evolved like over the time? Like what have you seen? What changes have been done, and where are the changes that are still like, on a slower process?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see more conversation, obviously, around all of these different aspects of health, whether it's from, fertility, menopause, obviously core topics, but even just osteoporosis, cardiology. And if we're talking about them more at a leadership level, because of the employee base or because of the patient cohort, then at least we're starting to put them into structure, the procedures and so on. And we still have a long way to go to get that where it's, really specialist care. And I suppose the problem I have often in healthcare is the fragmentation and the silo. Is if we're not talking about these spaces, then the word that's used a lot is niche. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
how are we still talking about women's health being niche? It's literally half the population. And the most common conditions are still the most common conditions, cardiology being a great example.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's nothing niche about cardiology, there's nothing niche about women, right?
Yeah.
Nothing niche about oncology either, right? And I appreciate the audience. So I think we just need to, we continue to converse and talk about the challenges, the problems, the opportunities, but also making sure what do we have and what do we not have. And I think we need to continue to really focus on the gaps in care, the gaps in data. From my perspective, it's the gaps of what in even just in research, what do we
Mm-hmm.
not have enough research on? And I think there's probably, as we can all kind of attest to, there's so many areas of research that is still very much focused on male data, male problems,
Mm-hmm.
and that's fine. Nothing against it. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but we absolutely need to do a better job of getting women represented in clinical research in order to get women focused solutions that is based upon women data, and that's across. It would appear across all of the areas. Probably breast cancer is probably the exception of the rule,
Mm-hmm.
but saying that that's there's a lot more needed there.
Yeah, and I know we spoke before also in that perspective in terms of like integration of clinicians, right, into the into in general into health space, health tech space, right? Like, because I do see, I don't know, like the transparency between the involvement of the clinical teams and things as such. So, as you said, there are like current gaps that you identified. So, how do you see? Or how can physicians or clinicians play an active role in closing those gaps with the health tech partners? Or even are the health tech partners aware that they need a clinician's voice?
Yeah, no, and I've got a few very strong opinions in this
Mm-hmm.
space. So, and I just recently, and I've never realized that I've gotten gaslit, and I hate that term. I really don't
Mm-hmm.
typically use it, but recently I've had a situation where I was sharing symptoms, and my doctor was like, "You're fine," and I was like, "This is actually literally what gaslighting feels like," and
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised by it. So I feel like we need to nearly re-educate or nearly force, and I hate the word force, but if you're a clinician in any discipline that's treating female patients, then you should be having some access or some upskilling for women's health. And I think that just nearly needs to become mandatory. So, and one of the gaps that we've talked about before, Jasmine, is around the area where technology come in here. So, I'm lucky enough, I've been working with Elfie for the last 13 months. And the beauty of that is bringing together the research, but also making it easier and faster. And obviously, we can build LLMs now to be clinical grade information on the back end, making it sure and safe for the
Mm-hmm.
clinician to be able to tap into that more information. Because the doctor that I was sitting in front of a few weeks ago had access to the latest research for the symptoms I was expressing. She absolutely would have treated me different because and it was a she. Like this is also where I was so surprised. It's like she gets
Mm-hmm.
this. She's in the same bucket here. But realistically, she didn't have access to the information or the research, and hence my care was subpar. That is for sure. And I think that's what I would see in my networks, and I'm sure yours are the same, where we hear this all the time. That the doctors aren't trained in order to
Mm-hmm.
deal with women's health specifically, unless they're an absolute specialist in that space, and there just isn't enough specialists. And hence, as we know, then misdiagnosed and underdiagnosed is very
Mm-hmm.
common scenarios for women across all areas of health. From
Yeah.
cardiology to oncology to everything else. So we've got some big gaps there, and I think that's the beauty for me is we're never going to not need clinicians, right? And
Mm-hmm.
obviously I work in tech, and I'm very focused on how do we improve the tech, but how do we improve the tech for those two populations in particular, that end user to be more informed and more supported at home 24/7, as well as that clinician to have access to the best and latest and
Mm-hmm.
greatest research, and to be able to connect those two seamlessly without having reams of data or without having confusing volumes of data that might also cause risk. And technology can again sync those two together. And that's, as I mentioned Elfie before, it is solving those problems with clinical grade access to information, with clinical grade research, with clinical grade LLMs and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think we have the ability to really kick off how do we do a better job on research? How do we do a better job of breaking the data silos? How do we do a better job of, I suppose, giving the clinician the data that they need in order to treat the person in front of them to the best of their ability, in the time limitations that every clinician has,
Yeah.
which we all know are tight and getting tighter in many ways.
Absolutely. No, very well said. So what are some innovations that you're very excited about right now?
I'm looking at a lot of softwares and hardwares that are at home testing. I think is one I'm
Hmm.
very excited about. So someone can watch their numbers themselves and feed them into, a clinically validated tool to know what's tracking the right direction and so on. So when they do go back to their doctor, they can either feed that data back in, but when they could do, they might have more data to have a discussion, a more productive discussion. And this is the beauty for me is I think at home testing is huge in women's health. Like if I look at pretty much everything we can think of, saliva,
Hmm.
bloods, hormones, urine, like we can measure all of that at home more consistently now than ever. And I think, again, data is important here because if we're looking at the research, we haven't got enough research in the vast majority of conditions and the vast majority of disciplines. So without the data, we can't get to better quality research, which limits, pharmacology or treatment or
Hmm.
just limits the whole space. And that's where I think that's for me is the most exciting space is that at home testing of giving people access to more of their own data, but at the same time is then understanding what that means. So we should become more informed
Hmm.
at home on these, so we can, as I said, best interact with the clinicians when we get to see the right clinician at the right time with the right data.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like with, the competing interests and time, and I feel like at home testing or at home, the more we can do personalized and at home, kind of minimizing the time to go see the doctors, get the testing done and all that. I feel like that's what digital health allows us to do, right? More of the things that we can do at our own time and doesn't have
Yeah,
to be at a particular time. So yeah, no, definitely. That's also something that I'm on a lookout for, especially our cancer patients. As you know, they're time toxicity is definitely real, and I'm really excited about digital health monitoring. Hopefully, more and more studies are being done in that space as well. Um,
yeah,
how do you like? So, one thing that always comes to whenever I talk about digital health, or I had proposed a clinical trial with using digital health, using like applications on the phone as well as a wearable technology, the number one question always comes in the space of equity and accessibility.
yeah.
That I also come across, and like, there's so many limitations, especially in the United States. So what is your perspective from a tech point? Like, what can we do, or what has been done? How can we ensure the balance between the equity and accessibility?
Yeah, this is a huge area, as we talked about before, right? We need to
Hmm.
have more people represented in way more clinical trials, so we have much more robust research with it. And this is again, I'm excited about what the work Elfie does. I really
Hmm.
am. They're solving so many problems. The commercial model for Elfie is working with pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, and so on, which means at the end user, ultimately, the app itself is free. But the infrastructure behind that means you can ultimately surface to people, clinical trials that they're eligible for example, or research
Hmm.
they may be interested in. So you can start to surface people and solutions to what they might need, what they might be interested in. Uh, Free of charge, right? And that means then that you have the option to know know what you're eligible for, what you might be interested in, what you should be interested in. For example, rare diseases is probably the best at doing it. But it also importantly is making it more accessible to your point of I can share all of my past data. So I'm not starting again with a new data set. I'm not
Hmm.
starting from blank. I'm sharing, it could be 2 years, 10 years of data and being like, here's what I've been doing and here's my results or the tracks or the trends of medications and treatments and
Hmm.
whatnot. And that to me goes back to like if we can break down the data silo and we can start to leverage that data more intelligently, obviously with consent, very
Hmm.
much consent driven, but we can do an awful lot more with it. And I'm definitely an example. I've got loads of data for years, but I'm in no clinical trials. And
Hmm.
so, I could be a good control. I don't have any
Right.
conditions, thankfully, but I could be a great control, right? And I think every woman I know who talks about
Hmm.
research is happy to be contributing,
Hmm.
right? We just don't have the infrastructure to do so. And I
Hmm.
think this is where I get very excited that if we can, like, we have this pool of data together, wearable data, lab results data, my self-reported symptoms, all of that in one space, and that can be much more intelligently used and not just a completely different separate silo. You have to sit in a certain location and have access to a certain, hospital and have to be
Hmm.
available. that's just the way of the past. We have to stop thinking of, location driven and time driven research. We have to
Hmm.
think this 24/7 global. And this
Yeah.
is the beauty of tech. I think we've talked about this before, is we can track and trend an awful lot more. We can gather more. I mean, then we can start to do more with it.
Hmm.
So I think we can with tech and with, good ecosystems that are connected, and, partners like platforms like this, we're able to literally make them more available at no cost to everybody and anybody who is interested or is encouraged by their doctor, for example, to participate in, a clinical trial. And that's possible today. This is not the future.
Hmm.
This is today. So it's exciting.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I feel like we also sometimes forget like how many people actually have already access to mobile, like advanced phones. Like it's not like a lot of people have anymore actually flip phones. Like a lot of people really have phones that are capable of having all these applications. So I feel like we really need to move from that understanding that like not a lot of people have access. It's actually maybe the opposite. If you run the numbers, that it's going to be a minority of people who do not have the access anymore. The majority of people have
Right.
the access. So
Yeah.
I think that's yeah, 100% what you said. So what are the unique challenges that you have faced as a woman leading a health tech or being a leader in health tech, and how have you navigated them?
Yeah, I think there's two things I mentioned there. One is that conversation about it being niche. And I'm like,
Hmm.
again, going back to there's nothing niche. And I'm sure every single one of us in this space has the conversation often. I have it more in the investment space where and I appreciate most of the investment money still sits with male controllers, and that's okay. They don't
Hmm.
understand women's health. As I say, we barely understand a lot of aspects of women's health.
Yeah.
So, it's that conversation of, if you don't understand it, it's hard to invest in it. And I get that. I recently was talking to an investment company asking me for my opinion on a smart earring company, and
Hmm.
I won't mention names with it, but it was three men that were creating this company, but the idea that it was for women's health, for women's research, and for women customers. I'm like, right, but where's the woman in the conversation? Did you involve any clinicians that are focused on
Hmm.
women's health, any specialists in that? And the answer was no. I was like, okay, so then was there, if you're talking about earrings, the vast majority of customers are going to be female. Was the design team led by female? No. I was like, okay, so where is the woman in this conversation? Are we just
Yeah.
going to assume? And the assumption was we have enough research in the world of women's health in order to build a product, and then we don't need any woman a part of this, bar being the customer.
Hmm.
That to me is just ignorant. It's ignorant
Hmm.
and it's rude and it's
Yeah.
just it's last year. So, the beauty of it, then I'm able to go. I'm not going to buy. I'm also, as a customer, I'm not going to buy from a company who has chosen
Hmm.
to ignore me as a leader, who has chosen to ignore me as a strategic partner, and is just thinking that I ultimately I'm going to buy the product because it's fine and it's good enough.
Yeah.
We're past that. And the research I was doing at the time when I was writing the white paper 2024 was very much that women do choose products now that they
Hmm.
feel are ethically and principally aligned with their beliefs, right? So we are
Hmm.
looking at supporting more women leaders, more clinicians, more focused in the women's health space, and that's very, very powerful. And the one thing I don't think we do enough of is, put our money where our mouth is. For example, like 85% of consumer spend is
Hmm.
controlled by a woman.
Yeah.
80% of healthcare decisions for the household is decided by the woman, but we don't do enough to say, I'm not going to purchase that product because I don't
Mm.
believe it's designed for me, and so on. And sometimes we just have no alternative, and I
Hmm.
do a lot of work in the sports industry as well. It's a whole complement of products in the sports industry that had no research around women's physiology. So they're not designed for women. I mean, I wear gloves playing one sport, I wear boys small, right? Because
Hmm.
they don't even label it as
Hmm.
designed for a smaller hand. It's boy small,
Yep.
and it's so this is all these crazy things that happen in the world. And I think it goes back to the mentality that women is a niche category that needs to completely
Hmm.
stop. And people need to, if you're investing in a product and solution, if anyone's listening, is, get women around the table. We think differently, we partner differently, we have different physiology, and we're thankfully, I think, more on the pulse around what research is
Hmm.
happening in the world of women's health. And we do want solutions. We're willing to put our elbow to the wheel here and leaning behind, whether it's research or strategy or so on. So yeah, this more a case
Yep.
of collaboration to get to something and some products and solutions that are designed for us, that are validated for us.
Awesome. Thank you. To end our conversation today, what is one message that you would like to give to the audience today?
Oh, great question. I think it goes back to collaboration. It's
Mm-hmm.
very much around there is a large swath of women and men around the world in different specialities who want to collaborate to do
Mm-hmm.
better. So I'm a big believer of whatever gap is in the knowledge set or in the experience around the table is reach out and to a specialist in that space and collaborate. We are here to collaborate and we want better solutions, and that'll only happen because by working together because it's complex. We appreciate it's a complex space that we're trying to solve for, but it's doable.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, and I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you. Happy to have it.
Thank you.